next 4 weeks, this is going to be a little bit different than what we would normally do on the show.
Yeah, we have a bit of a real doozy to talk about here because there's lots of stuff going on right now. As you probably heard on our Twitter and Instagram accounts, we'll be releasing 4 videos throughout the month to spread awareness about the Animation Guild and their mission to help all struggling animators and artists. Yeah, there's a lot of stuff going on about this thing. It's a bit of a real doozy, but I'm pretty sure many of you guys are like, what in the actual heck is this guild anyway? Like, we never even heard of this thing. Well, for the people that don't know what this is, there's actually more so of a long name for it. It's actually called the Animation Guild and Affiliated Optical, Electronic, and Graphic Arts. Whew, try saying that 10 times fast.
The Animation Guild is a union of really talented artists, writers, and technicians that first founded in 1952 and currently has more than 6,000 members to this day.
And recently, there have been multiple divisions of that trying to unionize, but I'm still confused about this whole thing because I'm like, are they striking or are they not? But apparently they are not, but kind of like what happened to last year with the writers and actors back-to-back, and good lord, that was a few...
And the video game people, because there's still a video game unionizing strike going on. So TAG is currently trying to get negotiations this month with the AMPTP, and they're doing everything they can to fight for struggling animators who want fair payments, better working environments, scheduling, and protections against AI, or artificial intelligence.
Yeah, but we can say that we are in the middle of supporting everything about this mission.
And nowadays, animation is pretty much everywhere.
Let's just say that everywhere you go, animation shall follow you!
Yeah, so we fully support everything that the Animation Guild is doing to help all the struggling artists and animators, be able to survive in Hollywood.
I thought that it would be like 1920s or something like that when it started, right? Yeah, I'm pretty sure you all think that. Because we didn't know this, but apparently this started back in the beginning of the 1900s.
Yeah, so as you all are aware, animation has been around for centuries because we've been doing some careful research, and we found out that animation has been happening since the 1900s. Let's go back to the very beginning and explain how this all got started.
Yeah, because
now, this is The Enchanted Drawing, directed by J. Stuart Blackton, and is well known for containing the first animated sequences recorded on standard picture film. And this was released back in 1900.
And then apparently 8 years later, in 1908, something called Phantasmagorie, made by Emily Cole, is known to be the earliest examples of hand-drawn animation.
Or as some people like to call it, traditional animation. Where everything is all drawn by hand and done on paper, frame by frame. Well then, in 1914, we have Gertie the Dinosaur, and it is known as the first to use key framing to gain... And it also gained lots of
notoriety.
Notoriety, right. So it was actually pretty popular back in the 1910s.
My uncle and aunt actually know about this next one, because in 1919 we have a lovable character named Felix the Cat. The first cartoon character, in fact, to get his own series of animated shorts. And I'm pretty sure you guys know this lovable feline, including some members of my family.
Yeah, so Felix the Cat pretty much was like the biggest star to get his own series of shorts back in the 1910s.
So if you think about it, I'm pretty sure some of you guys are like, oh, Mickey Mouse is the one who started everything. It's actually Felix who did it.
Yeah, because Mickey wouldn't make his official debut until 1928, when he appeared in the now publicly domained Steamboat Willie, which is also the very first animated short to use synchronized sound.
But the thing is, things started to change a little bit in 1932, when Flowers and Trees not only won an Academy Award for Best Animated Short, but it was also the one to feature Technicolor. So we're starting to slowly get to a time where color is starting to become a part of technology.
Yeah, because the cartoons we already mentioned earlier were all done in black and white. But then with some Technicolor processes, they started making these cartoons in full color. And then, a year later, King Kong was the very first animated short to use stop motion.
Yeah, so this isn't the modern King Kong that you guys know from, the Monsterverse and all that stuff nowadays, but
Disney made the leap into making their very first animated feature film, which was also the very first animated feature film in history, with 1937's Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. And it was a huge success back then.
Like, here's where, but now we've talked more so about, the theater and all that stuff, but now we're getting into the time when television was becoming a part of our lives, because we didn't have, a whole bunch of televisions back then, because as a form of media back in the day, we all had a whole bunch of radios to understand, because we didn't have television back then. Like, NBC and ABC and CBS, they didn't even start with the television business. They started with radio business, in fact. So all of the television networks, they were alive back then, but they weren't on TV. They were just in the form of radio. So back in the 1950s, when television was starting to take off, animation decided to join in too.
Crusader Rabbit was known to be the very first animated series made specifically for television, which ran from 1950 to 1959. Nearly 10 years.
But yeah, but now we're going to get into sort of a double shift here, and I'll explain that here in a second. The first part of the shift was because I'm pretty sure many of you guys don't know Crusader Rabbit, but many of you guys probably do know the very first primetime animated series that we got back in 1960 being the Flintstones, which was being one of the very first major things that Hanna-Barbera absolutely did. But then, the second shift being in 1984 was when the Lucasfilm Computer Graphics Project, I'll get to that name in just a second, they attended something called SIGGRAPH, which is basically like a cool convention show sort of thing in Anaheim, California. And they
sort of an animation festival, like the Annecy Festival.
Sort of in a way. And SIGGRAPH actually apparently still a thing to this day, by the way.
Oh, I did not know that.
So the Lucasfilm Computer Graphics Project took their first animated short with them. Guess what that short was?
The Adventures of Andre and Wally B. from 1984.
But here's the thing. They couldn't finish it in time. So according to a documentary that I watched, they actually showed the audience an unfinished cut, and they had how they made the animation, with the wires and everything, on the
wireframes and the renders.
Yeah,
because computer animation was still very new back then.
Yeah, because of how computers, because we have computers everywhere nowadays. Computers were so limited back then and all that stuff, but the audience was roaring. And I don't mean that as a bad thing. They were quite surprised, and in fact, I heard in the same documentary, what software did you use for that? And then, let's go back to the Lucasfilm Computer Graphics Project. I know, kind of a mouthful name, right?
Mm-hmm.
But this would be the beginning for another thing, because if we go a couple years later, in 1986, they changed their name. And what do you guys think that name was? Pixar Animation Studios. Because from what I heard, Steve Jobs, the late and great Steve Jobs, which is best known for Apple products, he bought that division and they renamed it as Pixar. And a couple years later, in 1986, they attended SIGGRAPH again with Luxo Jr. And I'm going to just say this as a sole side note, to this day, I think the animation still holds up. But the thing is, Pixar has done a lot of technological achievements. Because not only did they showed off one of the first computer animated short films, Andre and Wally B. They renamed themselves as Pixar, and they released Luxo Jr., and then apparently that had a pretty good... it may have had a standing ovation, I'm not sure, but it did get nominated.
Also, in 1989, Tin Toy was the first animated short done with computers to win an Academy Award.
Because I was going to say that Luxo Jr. was nominated for one. And then, like he just said, a few years later, Tin Toy received that. But then, we climbed to the 1990s, where the opportunities for Pixar became big. So big, in fact, that you're not going to believe what they did next.
Yep, after making numerous experimental short films, they teamed up with Disney in 1990 to make the world's first fully computer animated feature film, which would be released in 1995 That would be Toy Story.
And Toy Story had, like, an incredible run at the box office. Even though, like, think about this. Released only in November of that year. So it only had 2 months or something like that at the theater. Instantly became number one at the box office that entire year. And in fact, it didn't just receive an Academy Award. It received a Special Achievement Academy Award. And, as a matter of fact, Buzz and Woody, they were literally there!
Interesting alloy. You wouldn't happen to have a cousin in Cleveland who's a bowling trophy, would you?
But now we're going to jump a few years later to around the same time in Thanksgiving 1998. Paramount and Nickelodeon's The Rugrats movie.
Yep, released in 1998, the Rugrats movie became the first animated feature not made by Disney to gross over $100 million in the United States, earning up to $141 million altogether during its worldwide box office run.
Now, sadly, it didn't receive any kind of like special Academy Awards or anything like that. But if you think about
it's more of a traditional 2D animated feature that also uses a little bit of computer animation. And then we jump into the 2000s when animation was getting bigger and bigger and bigger. Because starting in 2002, The Lord of the Rings, The Two Towers featured the character, how do you pronounce this character's name?
Now, in The Lord of the Rings, The Two Towers, it featured Gollum. But Gollum was known to be quite interesting for another reason, instead of just going like, "My precious," and all that stuff. There actually is a reason why he made such an achievement.
Yep, because Gollum was the first animated character, he's not quite animated because it was more so of a live-action movie, but he was the first film character to be created using computer animation and motion capturing. And that way he could appear alongside the human actors in the film.
Yeah, so it's more so of a way to like kind of like have something blend in with the real world, and you're just like, is that thing real? So it's like something where animation starts to fool your eyes and makes you think that something is so real. And speaking of things that are so real, we jump to the last thing we're going to talk about, being the year 2009. And it was around Christmas time and everything and all that stuff. But the biggest movie of all time would make it to the big screen. And it spawned not one, but 4 sequels. And we're getting the second sequel next year. James Cameron's legendary Avatar, which pushed all sorts of boundaries for making CGI animation by using advanced technology to create the incredibly visually stunning world of Pandora, which is still to this day being used, because like I said, we have a few more sequels for this coming out, so they're not done with this yet. And it won 3 Academy Awards on top of this. 3! And it's still, to this day, the highest grossing film ever made.
Especially since the environments of all the Avatar characters were mixed in with computer animation and motion capturing, like what Lord of the Rings did with the creation of Gollum.
So it may have been one of the most painful films to ever make, I'm pretty sure, because it must have taken years for something like that. But yeah, many of these films and characters and franchises not only made like millions to billions of dollars, possibly, as a matter of fact, in the box office and all that stuff, captivated audiences all around the world and all that stuff, but unfortunately, some stuff just never ever saw the light of day.